last year, on May 25, Mr. Murray was indicted by Burke County Grand Jury for the April 11 murder of Father Rene Robert.
One of the things that I think that the three bishops really tried to underscore when we were in Augusta was to, first of all, to say that we were not asking that no penalty be imposed. It was not a question of clemency or a question of ignoring the severity of the murder of Father Robert. But we also felt that taking another human life in response to the taking of a human life really adds nothing to the situation, except that it further denigrates the value of a human life.
We also wanted to honor the wishes of Father Robert, who somewhat prophetically, years before, had handwritten a declaration or a wish that he had that if he ever succumbed to a violent death, that the perpetrator would not experience the penalty, death penalty. And although it wasn't something that would be admissible to the court, it demonstrates the culture of life that the last three popes have endorsed as a part of our entire understanding of the sanctity of human life. And so we feel that Father Robert was really a prophet in kind of predicting that this would happen. But the effect of what has happened has been an opportunity for us to reinforce the Church's teaching that all human life is valuable, even the life of a criminal. And we agree with the sentence that he should remain incarcerated for the rest of his life without the chance of parole. And we feel that he's fulfilling Father Robert's wishes, and he's also supporting the culture of life that Pope Francis is now recently speaking about as well.
It has never been the Church's teaching that those who have enacted a serious crime, certainly the taking of a human life, should not face punishment. But the Church has taught and continues to teach with increasing intensity that the capital punishment continues the cycle of violence. It cannot restore the life of those who have been murdered, even the life of a horrendous murderer or someone who has enacted terrible violence on others. Even that life is precious in God's sight. And while that may be very hard for people to hear, the opposite begins a very awkward and painful degeneration into saying whose life is valuable and whose life has lost value. And once you go down that road, you are on a very, very difficult moral plane, because there are people who would be willing to say that others have lost the right to life. Other lives are not valuable. We began, obviously, with looking at the innocent unborn, the child within the womb. But you also then encounter people who suggest that those who are critically ill or sick or older, their lives have lost value. We just cannot protect human life by distinguishing one life over another as though all life is not precious.
The sense of revenge or experiencing justice that would lead to a death penalty doesn't really fit in any longer with our understanding of the preciousness of all human life. And the Mosaic law of the Old Testament was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and it was, a proportional revenge for something that was committed to another. But Jesus, in the New Testament, is quoted as saying, "You've heard that it was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but now I tell you, you must love one another and love those who even persecute you." And so, as Pope Francis has recently said, the whole idea of the death penalty is so contrary to the gospel. It rejects the gospel. And that is something that I think he's very cognizant of, and he's very forceful in being consistent with the Church's understanding of life from the beginning until natural death. And I'm hoping that people see that life imprisonment without parole is perhaps even more cruel than a death sentence. And so I understand that there's a certain sense of closure or satisfaction or whatever people are looking for in putting a person to death who has injured or rather has put to death someone that they love. But in the end, it really doesn't probably satisfy them as much as they think it will. But to know that they're suffering and their rights are taken away and they're living in a very small cell in a terrible environment is a way of, in our current society, of keeping them away from the population so that they could do no more harm. And I want to say one more thing, because if you look at our catechism, our Catholic catechism, it does say that there are times when capital punishment can be justified. And it's very rare, and it wouldn't apply necessarily to the United States. It applies to cultures that are somewhat primitive. And the death penalty in those kinds of civilizations, because the Church is universal, would only be necessary if they could not secure that person and isolate him from the general population where that person could do more harm. But as our societies throughout the world are getting more and more sophisticated, it's less needed to put that person to death to protect the rest of society. And so I think in the revisions of the Catholic Catechism, you'll see that probably the wording of that changed significantly.